On Christmas Day, my mother handed my sister a $500 designer bag. She gave me a used candle and snickered, "Well, that's all you're good for anyway. Maybe she can sell it for lunch money," my brother mocked. I quietly set the candle on the table and walked out. An hour later, my aunt burst out screaming at them. My parents used me as a weapon. During their divorce, forced me to lie in court, and both tried to guilt me into choosing them. So my aunt took me in, exposed both, and I pulled the most beautiful revenge without saying a word. I remember being 8 years old, tossing and turning in bed the night before Christmas. Like every kid in the world, I couldn't wait until the morning. But instead of waking up to presents and laughter, I woke up to my parents screaming at each other downstairs. It wasn't the usual argument. My dad called my mom psychotic, and when I peeked out my window, I saw her tossing my dad's clothes onto our frozen lawn, her face twisted in a mix of rage and hurt. I hid in my closet, listening as they shouted awful accusations about cheating and money issues. I was too scared to even go downstairs to open my presents. And when I heard my dad slam the front door so hard that our family photo shattered on the hallway floor, my whole world broke. He left me on Christmas morning without even a goodbye. I went downstairs watching the empty driveway from the living room window, crying too hard to even begin opening my presents. Things started getting really rough at school after that. I used to be the kid teachers praised, always cheerful and doing great in class, but I started acting out, telling mean jokes during lessons, and bothering other kids just to get a laugh. It wasn't even fun, but it felt better than feeling nothing. My grades fell fast from A's to D's. At home, things were even worse. My mom started taking these new pills that made her sleepy all the time and cranky when she woke up. Sometimes late at night, I'd sneak downstairs and see her crying alone in front of the TV, looking totally broken. My teacher, Miss Cartwright, noticed I was struggling and suggested counseling during a parent-teacher conference. My mom just snapped back, insisting I was fine and didn't need help. But then I heard my dad got a new girlfriend, and things got even worse. It felt like my dad replaced us, and something inside me broke even more. One day, I let the class hamster out, threw erasers at kids, anything to make the noise in my head quieter. Mom eventually found my behavior journal from school, full of angry scribbles about storms and monsters, and convinced herself I was doing hard substances. Even after my teacher explained that these were typical signs of a kid going through a rough divorce, my mom wouldn't listen. She became obsessed with the idea someone was poisoning me. And my dad, instead of helping, used my bad behavior against her in court, telling everyone I was proof she was unfit to parent. I overheard them fighting about it, and that's when I got this idea. If I acted even worse, maybe they'd come together to fix things. But it all blew up horribly. After a really awful day at school, where I wouldn't stop making weird noises during a test, my mom completely lost it. She dragged me into the bathroom, shaking, yelling about substances and bad influences. I sobbed and pleaded with her that I wasn't doing anything wrong, but she grabbed kitchen scissors and hacked a chunk of hair right off my head. It hurt, and I could feel red trickling down, but she didn't care. She shoved me into the car, driving over the speed limit to urgent care. I sat curled up in the back seat, shaking, feeling tinier than ever before. When the doctor prepared the needle to draw my blood, I finally snapped. All the fear and sadness burst out of me at once, and I screamed, "I just want Daddy to come home." Everyone froze. I was crying. The doctor looked between me and my mom, whose eyes didn't even flinch as she told the doctor to just do the test. My blood test, of course, came back clean, but my mom wasn't satisfied. She dragged me outside, claiming we were going to another hospital. But then right as we stepped outside, I saw my dad standing there, looking more furious than ever. I'll never forget what happened after that. My dad was standing there, his face red with anger. He didn't yell or scream. Instead, he spoke in a low, scary voice that I could barely hear. He told my mom that he knew what she was doing, taking me to hospitals for fake tests. He said he had proof she was making up stories about me being sick. The veins in his neck bulged as he clutched a manila folder that I assumed contained the evidence he was talking about. My mom started screaming at him right there in the parking lot. She said I was sick, and he just didn't care enough to notice. Her voice cracked as tears streamed down her face, mascara creating dark rivers on her cheeks. People walking by started staring at us, some slowing down to watch the drama unfold. I felt so small and embarrassed, like I wanted to disappear into the cracks of the concrete beneath my feet. A security guard, a tall man with a stern expression and a crisp uniform, came over and asked us to leave, or he would call the police. My dad grabbed my arm gently and said I was coming with him. My mom tried to pull me back, her nails digging slightly into my skin. I was caught in the middle, being tugged back and forth while they argued about who I belonged to, like I was a possession, rather than their child. The security guard did end up calling the police. When they arrived, their blue and red lights flashing across the hospital's exterior. I had to tell them what happened at the doctor's office. The officer, a kind woman named Officer Martinez with warm brown eyes and a gentle smile, listened carefully. She crouched down to my level, her notepad balanced on her knee. She asked me if I felt safe with either of my parents. I didn't know what to say. I loved them both, but lately, everything felt scary and confusing. That night, I stayed with my dad at his apartment. The place smelled of takeout and laundry detergent, with piles of work documents scattered across the coffee table. He called his lawyer right away, pacing the small living room with his phone pressed to his ear. I heard him talking about Munchausen by proxy, an emergency custody hearing. I didn't understand what those words meant then, but I would learn soon enough. The next few weeks were a blur of court appearances and meetings with social workers. The courthouse was a maze of echoing hallways and rooms that smelled like furniture polish and anxiety. My mom and dad said terrible things about each other. My mom claimed my dad was neglectful and didn't believe in medical care. My dad showed the judge records of all the hospital visits my mom had taken me to, pointing out that doctors never found anything wrong with me. The stack of medical files was at least 3 inches thick. I had to talk to a special person called a guardian ad litem. Her name was Mrs. Wilson, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain around her neck. Her job was to figure out what was best for me. She asked me lots of questions about living with my mom and dad in her office, filled with children's drawings and potted plants. I tried to be honest, but I was afraid of hurting either of their feelings. The judge, an older man with a white beard and tired eyes, ordered that I stay with my dad temporarily, while they investigated my mom. My mom cried when she heard this, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. She looked at me like I had betrayed her, which made me feel awful, even though none of this was my fault. Living with my dad wasn't much better. He was always working, leaving me alone a lot in the apartment with frozen dinners and instructions to lock the door. When he was home, he was on the phone with his lawyer or typing angry emails to my mom, the blue light from his laptop illuminating his exhausted face late into the night. He never asked how I felt about any of this. Sometimes he would mutter things like, "Your mother is crazy," when he thought I couldn't hear from my bedroom with its thin walls. One night, I overheard my dad on the phone with someone, talking about selling our family home to pay for his lawyer. His voice was strained and desperate as he discussed property values and mortgage payments. When I asked him about it the next morning over a breakfast of cold cereal, he yelled at me for eavesdropping. It was the first time he'd ever yelled at me like that, and it scared me. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my room, sketching in my notebook to distract myself. Things got worse when my mom showed up at my school one day during lunch period. She wasn't supposed to see me without supervision, but she came anyway, standing by the fence in a rumpled coat. She was crying and tried to convince me to come with her, saying she had a doctor in another state who could help me. My teacher, Miss Gonzalez, saw what was happening and called the principal, who called the police. My mom was arrested right there at my school, handcuffed and placed in a police car. All the other kids saw it happen, their faces a mixture of shock and fascination. After that, the judge was really mad at my mom. But then something happened with my dad too. The guardian ad litem found out he had been leaving me home alone for hours while he worked, even though I was only 12. She also discovered he had a drinking problem that was getting worse during the stress of the custody battle. I had found empty whiskey bottles hidden in the recycling bin, but hadn't known what to say about it. Just when I thought things couldn't get more complicated, my Aunt Rachel showed up. She's my dad's sister, but they hadn't spoken in years because of some old family fight over my grandparents' will. Aunt Rachel came to court one day and asked to speak to the judge. She said neither of my parents was in a position to take care of me properly right now. She stood tall in her simple blue dress, speaking clearly and confidently. Aunt Rachel lived in a small town about an hour away. She was a kindergarten teacher with a cozy house painted yellow with white trim and a friendly golden retriever named Buddy. The judge asked if I would be willing to stay with her temporarily while my parents sorted out their issues. I nodded, not knowing what else to do. The first night at Aunt Rachel's house, I cried myself to sleep in the guest room she had prepared for me, with its patchwork quilt and lace curtains. But in the morning, she made chocolate chip pancakes and didn't pressure me to talk. She just sat with me at her kitchen table, letting me know I wasn't alone. Buddy put his head on my lap, his warm brown eyes looking up at me, as if he understood I needed comfort. Days turned into weeks at Aunt Rachel's house. She never badmouthed my parents, even though she had every reason to be angry with them. Instead, she helped me write letters to both of them and made sure I had regular phone calls. She took me to a therapist named Dr. Kim, who helped me understand that none of this mess was my fault. Dr. Kim's office had comfortable chairs and a sand tray that I could use to express feelings I couldn't put into words. Aunt Rachel came to every court hearing, always dressed neatly and prepared with notes. She spoke calmly and clearly about wanting what was best for me. When my mom started accusing her of trying to steal me away, her face contorted with rage. Aunt Rachel didn't get angry. She just said she was stepping up because I needed someone stable right now. My dad didn't take it well either. He accused Aunt Rachel of interfering in business that wasn't hers, his voice rising in the courtroom. But when the judge asked him about his drinking and work schedule, he couldn't deny that he wasn't in a good place to be a full-time parent. 3 months after I moved in with Aunt Rachel, the judge made a big decision. He said my mom needed serious help for her mental health issues before she could take care of me again. He said my dad needed to address his drinking and work-life balance. Until then, Aunt Rachel would be my legal guardian. My parents were both upset. But for once, they didn't argue. I think they finally realized how much their fighting had hurt me. Living with Aunt Rachel became my new normal. She helped me with homework at her kitchen table, came to my soccer games with a thermos of hot chocolate, and made sure I had everything I needed. She even helped me start a YouTube channel about art, which was way better than the one my mom wanted me to make about being sick. Aunt Rachel and I developed a special bond. She understood me in ways my parents never had. She listened when I talked and respected my opinions. When I was sad about my parents, she let me be sad without trying to fix everything. Sometimes we would just sit on her porch swing, watching the sunset in comfortable silence. A year has passed now. My mom is getting help and doing better. My dad cut back on work and joined AA. They're both allowed supervised visits now. It's not perfect, but it's progress. I have my own room at Aunt Rachel's now, painted light blue with shelves for my growing collection of art supplies. Aunt Rachel says families come in all shapes and sizes. Sometimes the people who are supposed to take care of you can't, and others step in. She says that doesn't mean my parents don't love me. They just weren't able to be what I needed. I don't know what will happen next. The judge will review everything again soon. But for the first time in a long time, I feel safe. And that's something I didn't even know I was missing until I found it with Aunt Rachel. I've been living with Aunt Rachel for 3 months now. The small bedroom that once felt strange has become my own space. I've covered the walls with my drawings and arranged my books just how I like them. Aunt Rachel even helped me paint the walls a soft blue color last weekend. She surprised me with string lights that we hung around the window frame, making the room feel magical at night when everything else is dark and quiet. School is different here too. I don't have to worry about showing up with wrinkled clothes or missing homework anymore. Aunt Rachel checks my assignments every night and makes sure I have everything I need for the next day. My grades are getting better, and my teacher, Miss Taylor, says she's noticed how much more I'm participating in class. Last week, I even raised my hand to answer questions 3 times in one day, something I never would have done before. The custody hearings continue though. Last week, Mom showed up to court smelling like alcohol at 10 in the morning. She kept interrupting the judge and saying Aunt Rachel had brainwashed me. Her mascara was smudged under her eyes, and she wore the same blouse she'd worn to the previous hearing. Dad was there too, on his phone most of the time, barely looking up when the judge asked him questions about his parenting plan. When asked about where I would live if he got custody, he mentioned his girlfriend's apartment, but couldn't remember her address. The judge didn't look impressed. I noticed how he wrote something down each time my parents spoke, his expression growing more concerned. Aunt Rachel sits straight and answers every question clearly. She brings folders of information, my school records, doctor appointments she's taken me to, even pictures of my room at her house. She dresses neatly in simple clothes and speaks respectfully to everyone in the courtroom, even when Mom and Dad's lawyers try to make her sound bad. The social worker, Mrs. Barbara, has visited us 3 times now. She seems to like how things are going at Aunt Rachel's. She told the judge that I'm thriving in my current placement. Yesterday was hard. Mom called Aunt Rachel's house 7 times. When Aunt Rachel finally answered, Mom screamed so loud I could hear her from across the room. She threatened to come take me away in the middle of the night. Aunt Rachel calmly told her that wouldn't be a good idea and hung up. Then she called her lawyer and the police to report the threats. 2 officers came by to take a report, and Aunt Rachel installed a new security system that same day. That night, she showed me how the system worked and gave me my own code to use. Just in case, she said, though her smile was meant to reassure me. Dad's response was different, but still troubling. He sent me a text saying if I really loved him, I'd tell the judge I want to live with him. He promised to buy me a new gaming system if I did. When I showed Aunt Rachel, she didn't get angry or tell me what to do. She just asked how the message made me feel. I told her it made my stomach hurt. She nodded and said we should add it to the folder for the judge. Later, I heard her on the phone with her lawyer, her voice low and worried. The hardest part is seeing my parents act this way. Mom used to braid my hair and sing me songs when I was little. Dad taught me how to ride a bike and cheered the loudest at my first school play. But something changed as I got older. The drinking, the fighting, the empty fridge, the broken promises, it all became normal to me. I didn't realize it wasn't supposed to be that way until I came to live with Aunt Rachel. Sometimes I look at old photographs and wonder what happened to those smiling people who once seemed so happy to be my parents. Last night, I had a nightmare about going back to my old life. I woke up crying, and Aunt Rachel came in right away. She sat on the edge of my bed and rubbed my back until I calmed down. She didn't make me talk about it, just stayed there until I fell back asleep. In the morning, there was a new sketchbook on the kitchen table with a note saying, "For when you need to get the feelings out." She understands me in a way my parents never tried to. The sketchbook had thick, creamy pages that wouldn't tear easily, and a set of watercolor pencils beside it. She remembered I'd been wanting to try that technique. The court appointed me my own lawyer, a kind woman named Morgan, who explains everything in ways I can understand. She has curly red hair and always wears colorful scarves. She told me that my opinion matters, but that I'm not responsible for the final decision. That made me feel better. She asks me questions about what I want, and I've been honest. I want to stay with Aunt Rachel. Today was another hearing. Mom showed up late, and Dad didn't come at all. His lawyer said he had work obligations, but couldn't explain what they were when the judge asked. Mom started crying in court, saying she'd changed and deserved another chance. But when Morgan showed the judge Mom's social media posts from last weekend, pictures of her partying at a bar, Mom got angry and said her account must have been hacked. The judge removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, looking tired. Aunt Rachel never speaks badly about my parents when we're alone. She tells me it's okay to love them even if they can't take care of me right now. Sometimes we look at old family photos, and she shares good memories of when she and Dad were kids. She says addiction and mental health problems have hurt our family for generations, but that we can break the cycle. "You're already showing so much strength," she told me last night as we washed dishes together, the soapy water warm between our hands. The social worker recommended that I have supervised visits with my parents. The first one with Mom was at a family center last Saturday. She brought me a stuffed animal but spent most of the time on her phone or asking me to tell the judge I wanted to come home. The supervisor had to remind her several times to engage with me appropriately. I held the stuffed animal, a purple elephant with glittery ears, on my lap the whole time, focusing on its softness instead of Mom's erratic behavior. Dad missed his first scheduled visit. For the second one, he brought his new girlfriend even though he wasn't supposed to. She was much younger than him and kept trying to take selfies with me. He spent most of the time trying to convince me that his apartment was way cooler than Aunt Rachel's house and that I'd have more freedom there. The supervisor ended the visit early when Dad started complaining loudly about the rigged system. On the drive home, I was quiet, and Aunt Rachel didn't push me to talk. After each visit, Aunt Rachel and I get ice cream and talk about how I'm feeling. She never pushes, just listens. Sometimes I don't want to talk at all, and that's okay too. On those days, we might watch a movie or work on an art project together. She's teaching me how to make jewelry with beads and wire. I made her a bracelet last week, and she wears it every day, even to court. The blue and silver beads catch the light when she moves her hand, and sometimes I see her touch it when things get tense, like it reminds her of something good. The guardian ad litem, Mr. Richard, visited both my parents' homes and Aunt Rachel's. His report to the judge was clear. My parents' living situations were unstable and concerning, while Aunt Rachel provided a consistent nurturing environment. He recommended that Aunt Rachel be granted permanent guardianship with my parents having supervised visitation rights that could be expanded if they showed improvement. Mom's response was to post angry messages online about the corrupt system. Dad stopped showing up to hearings altogether. Meanwhile, Aunt Rachel enrolled me in a support group for kids in similar situations. I've made 2 friends there, Reese and Elizabeth. It helps to know I'm not the only one going through this. Reese lives with his grandparents and Elizabeth with her older sister. We sometimes sit together during snack time, comparing notes on our lives without having to explain the complicated parts. The final hearing is next week. My stomach feels tight when I think about it, but Aunt Rachel says no matter what happens, we'll face it together. She's helped me pack an emotions box with things that make me feel better when I'm upset. A smooth stone from the beach, a picture of us making silly faces, a small bottle of lavender oil that smells calming, and my favorite colored pencils. Yesterday, I added a feather I found in the backyard, perfectly white and soft, like a tiny message of peace. I don't know what the judge will decide, but I know what home feels like now. It feels like regular meals and clean clothes. It feels like someone checking my homework and coming to my school events. It feels like being able to invite friends over without being embarrassed. It feels like Aunt Rachel's hand on my shoulder, steady and sure, guiding me toward a better future than the past I came from. It feels like finally being able to breathe deeply, to sleep through the night, to think about tomorrow without dread. It feels like hope. I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom at 13, watching my parents fight over me like I was a prize to be won. Not that either of them really wanted me, they just didn't want the other one to have me. Mom showed up late to the first custody hearing, her eyes bloodshot and her words slurring slightly when she tried to explain to the judge why she deserved to have me back. Dad sat on the other side with his new girlfriend, Melissa, who kept checking her phone and sighing loudly whenever Mom spoke. The judge wasn't impressed with either of them. He asked about my school attendance, which had been spotty at best when I lived with Mom. He asked about stable housing, which Dad couldn't really provide since he moved between apartments every few months when the rent went up. The whole time, I sat next to a court-appointed guardian who barely knew me, but was supposed to speak for what was best for me. "We'll reconvene in 2 weeks," the judge finally said. "And I expect both parties to provide more concrete evidence of their ability to provide a stable environment." I went home with Dad that day because that's what the temporary order said. His apartment had a pull-out couch for me in the living room. Melissa made it clear it was her home, not mine. By the way, she moved my backpack if I left it on her chair or complained about the bathroom being occupied when I took too long in the shower. Dad tried, I think. He bought groceries and asked about school, but he was gone most evenings at his job at the warehouse, leaving me with Melissa, who mostly ignored me unless I was in her way. Mom called 3 times that week, each time promising she was getting things together and that soon I'd be back with her. Each call ended with her crying or getting angry at Dad, even though he wasn't on the phone. The second hearing was worse than the first. Mom brought pictures of Dad from years ago when he was drinking heavily. Dad brought up Mom's boyfriend who had a criminal record. They threw accusations back and forth while I sank lower in my seat, wishing I could disappear. That's when Aunt Rachel showed up. I hadn't seen her in years. Dad's older sister who lived 2 states away. She sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, watching everything with a steady gaze that somehow made me sit up straighter. After court, she approached me in the hallway. "Jason," she said, using my name like it mattered. "I'm so sorry I haven't been around. I only just found out what was happening." Dad seemed surprised to see her but not happy. They had a tense conversation while I pretended not to listen. I heard phrases like "not your business" and "always judging me." Aunt Rachel didn't raise her voice once, just kept talking in that calm, firm way she had. The next day, Aunt Rachel came to Dad's apartment. She brought me a notebook and some colored pencils, remembering from years ago that I liked to draw. While Dad and Melissa argued in the bedroom about her being there, Aunt Rachel asked me questions, real questions about school and what books I liked and if I had friends. She listened to the answers like they mattered. Before she left, she handed me a card with her phone number. "Call me anytime," she said, "day or night." I called her 3 days later when Mom showed up at Dad's apartment drunk, screaming in the parking lot that he was keeping me from her. Dad yelled back that she was unfit to parent a goldfish. I locked myself in the bathroom and dialed out Rachel's number with shaking hands. She answered on the second ring. She didn't tell me everything would be okay or that I shouldn't worry. Instead, she asked practical questions. Was I safe right now? Did I have somewhere quiet to stay until things calmed down? Did I need her to come get me? The next court date, Aunt Rachel was there again, this time with a lawyer of her own. She filed for temporary guardianship, presenting evidence that neither of my parents was currently able to provide a stable home. She had pictures of Mom's apartment with empty bottles everywhere, statements from my teachers about my absences and incomplete homework when I lived with Mom, and documentation of Dad's frequent moves and the times he'd left me alone overnight with Melissa, who wasn't supposed to be my caregiver according to the temporary custody agreement. The judge listened carefully. For the first time, someone asked me directly where I wanted to live. I couldn't look at either of my parents when I whispered. With Aunt Rachel, Mom cried and said I was betraying her. Dad stormed out of the courtroom, Melissa hurrying after him. Aunt Rachel just put her hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently. The temporary guardianship was granted for 6 months. I moved into Aunt Rachel's guest room the following weekend. She had painted it blue because she remembered I once said it was my favorite color. There was a desk for homework, and shelves for books, and a real bed with a comforter that matched the walls. "This is your space," she told me. "You can decorate it however you want." The first few weeks were strange. I kept waiting for the yelling to start or for Aunt Rachel to change her mind about wanting me there. But she never did. Instead, she established routines. Breakfast together before school, dinner at the table each night where we talked about our days. She checked my homework and emailed my teachers to find out what I had missed and needed to catch up on. Mom called sometimes, her mood swinging between tearful apologies and angry accusations. Aunt Rachel never kept me from talking to her but stayed nearby in case the conversations became too much. Dad rarely called at all. The court-appointed social worker visited monthly, asking me questions and observing how things were going. Each time, she wrote in her notebook that I seemed to be adjusting well, that my grades were improving, that I was finally attending school regularly. 4 months into the temporary guardianship, Mom filed a motion to regain custody, claiming she had been sober for 30 days and had a new apartment. The court ordered supervised visits to start. I spent 2 hours with her at a family center while a social worker watched from the corner. Mom tried hard, bringing my favorite snacks and asking about school, but her hands shook, and she kept checking her phone nervously. Dad showed up to the next court date without Melissa, saying he had broken up with her and was more stable now. He had a new job in a 2-bedroom apartment. The judge ordered supervised visits with him too. Those visits were awkward. Dad didn't know what to talk about, so we mostly played video games in silence at the family center. He never asked about school or friends or anything that mattered. Meanwhile, life with Aunt Rachel continued to be steady and predictable. When I got the lead in the school play, she helped me practice my lines every night and sat in the front row on opening night, clapping until her hands must have hurt. When I struggled with math, she found a tutor. When I had nightmares about having to leave, she sat on the edge of my bed and promised she was fighting to keep me as long as I wanted to stay. The 6-month review came, and the judge extended Aunt Rachel's guardianship for another year, despite objections from both my parents. The social worker's report showed I was thriving for the first time in years. My grades had improved dramatically. I had joined the school art club and made real friends who sometimes came over to our house to hang out. This arrangement appears to be in the best interest of the child, the judge said, using legal language that didn't capture what Aunt Rachel had given me. As we left the courthouse, Aunt Rachel asked if I wanted to get ice cream to celebrate. While we sat at a small table with our cones, I tried to find words for what I was feeling. "Thank you," I finally said, "for fighting for me when no one else would." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You're worth fighting for, Jason. Don't ever forget that." And sitting there with melting ice cream and homework waiting at home and the knowledge that tomorrow would be just as steady as today, I started to believe her. The ice cream shop's bell jingled as we left. Rachel's car waiting in the parking lot. I didn't want to go home yet. Home meant listening to Mom and Dad scream at each other through the walls. It meant pretending I couldn't hear Mom crying in the bathroom or Dad slamming doors. "Can we drive around for a bit?" I asked. Rachel nodded like she understood everything I wasn't saying. We drove with the windows down, the spring air rushing through my hair. For those 30 minutes, I felt normal. But when Rachel finally pulled up to my house, reality crashed back. Dad's car was in the driveway, which was unusual for a Tuesday. Mom's car was there too. Great. They were both home. "Want me to come in with you?" Rachel asked. I shook my head. "I'll be fine. See you tomorrow." I wasn't fine. As soon as I opened the door, I heard them in the kitchen. They were fighting about me. Again. "He needs stability, Karen. Your constant moving and changing jobs isn't good for him." Dad's voice boomed. "Oh, and your drinking is stable? Coming home at midnight? Real Father of the Year mark." Mom screamed back. I tried to sneak upstairs, but the third step creaked. The kitchen went silent. "Jason, is that you?" Mom called out, her voice suddenly sweet. I had no choice but to go to the kitchen. They were standing on opposite sides of the room. Mom's mascara smudged, Dad's face red. "How was school?" Dad asked, like they hadn't just been screaming about my future. "Fine," I mumbled, heading for the fridge. Mom touched my shoulder. "We need to talk to you about something." That's when they told me they were getting divorced. I'd known it was coming, but hearing it still felt like being punched in the stomach. What I didn't expect was how ugly things would get. The next few weeks were a blur of arguments. They fought over everything. The house, the car, the furniture. But mostly, they fought over me. Not because they both desperately wanted me, but because neither wanted the other to win. I started spending more time at school, volunteering for every club and activity I could find. Rachel noticed and started bringing me dinner when I stayed late at the library. "They're making me choose," I told her one evening over pizza. "Mom wants me to say Dad's an alcoholic in court. Dad wants me to tell the judge Mom's unstable." Rachel didn't offer empty advice. She just listened, which was exactly what I needed. The custody hearing was scheduled for June. As it got closer, both my parents stepped up their campaigns to win me over. Mom suddenly became interested in my grades and started cooking my favorite meals. Dad took me fishing and bought me a new gaming system. But when they thought I wasn't looking, Mom was dating a new guy every week, sometimes not coming home until morning. Dad was drinking more than ever. Empty bottles piling up in the recycling bin. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I texted Rachel, but it was too late for her to respond. I stared at my ceiling, wondering how my life had fallen apart so quickly. The courthouse was cold and formal. I sat outside on a wooden bench while my parents and their lawyers met with the judge. I could hear raised voices through the door. My stomach hurt. That's when Aunt Maggie showed up. I hadn't seen Dad's sister in almost a year. She lived 3 hours away and ran her own business, so she didn't visit often. But there she was, striding down the hallway in her sensible shoes and blue blazer. "Jason," she said, sitting beside me. "I'm so sorry about all this." Before I could answer, the courtroom door opened. The judge called me in. For 30 minutes, I answered questions about my parents while trying not to cry. I didn't want to hurt either of them, but I couldn't lie. When asked about Mom's parenting, I mentioned the night she didn't come home. When asked about Dad, I admitted he sometimes passed out on the couch surrounded by beer cans. The judge's face grew more concerned with each answer. When I left the room, Aunt Maggie was waiting. She put her arm around me and led me to the cafeteria for a sandwich. "You did well in there," she said. "Telling the truth is hard, but it's important." 2 hours later, we were called back. The judge looked tired as she delivered her decision. Neither of my parents would get full custody. Instead, there would be a temporary arrangement while they both addressed their personal issues. That's when Aunt Maggie stood up. "Your Honor, if I may," she said. She proposed that I live with her while my parents sorted themselves out. The judge seemed relieved to have a solution. My parents were furious. They started arguing right there in the courtroom until the judge threatened to hold them in contempt. That night, I packed my things while Mom cried in her bedroom, and Dad yelled on the phone to his lawyer. Aunt Maggie waited patiently in her car. The drive to her house was quiet. I watched my neighborhood disappear in the side mirror, feeling both sad and relieved. Aunt Maggie's house was nothing special. A small 2-bedroom with a garden out back, but it was peaceful. She showed me to my room, which she'd quickly prepared with fresh sheets and a desk for schoolwork. "This is temporary," she said, "until your parents get their act together. But you can stay as long as you need." The first week was awkward. I missed my friends, especially Rachel. Aunt Maggie enrolled me in the local school, but I felt like an outsider. Every night, either Mom or Dad would call, making promises about getting me back soon. But as weeks turned into months, something changed. Aunt Maggie never tried to replace my parents, but she was steady in a way they hadn't been in years. She came to my soccer games. She helped with homework. She made sure I had 3 meals a day and clean clothes. When I got sick with the flu, she took time off work to care for me. When I was sad about missing my old life, she didn't dismiss my feelings or make it about her. Both my parents were fighting Aunt Maggie in court. They claimed she had stolen me, but the judge saw through it. Neither had completed the programs the court ordered, Mom's counseling or Dad's rehab. Aunt Maggie hired a lawyer with money she'd saved for a kitchen renovation. "You're worth more than new countertops," she told me with a smile. In November, the judge granted Aunt Maggie temporary guardianship for 6 months. My parents could visit, but only under supervision. On Thanksgiving, Aunt Maggie invited Rachel to drive up and join us. Seeing her walk through the door made me realize how much I'd missed her. We spent the afternoon playing board games while Aunt Maggie cooked. That night, after Rachel left to drive home, Aunt Maggie and I sat on the porch swing despite the cold. "I got a call from your dad today," she said. "He's thinking about moving to Arizona for a job." My heart sank. "He's giving up on me?" Aunt Maggie shook her head. "I think he's finally realizing that what's best for you might not include him right now. That's not giving up. That's growing up." I thought about that for a long time. "What about Mom?" "She's still fighting, but the judge is running out of patience." The next day, I called both my parents. The conversations were hard, but necessary. I told them I was happy with Aunt Maggie. I told them I still loved them, but I needed stability. Dad cried. Mom got angry. But for once, I didn't feel responsible for their feelings. Winter came, bringing snow to Aunt Maggie's little yard. We built a snowman and drank hot chocolate. I made friends at my new school. I joined the debate team. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in years. In January, the court made Aunt Maggie's guardianship permanent, with reviews every year. My parents could apply for custody again, but only if they showed significant improvement. That night, Aunt Maggie and I celebrated with takeout Chinese food. "You know," she said, passing me the fortune cookies, "I never planned on having kids, but being your aunt, your guardian, is the best thing that's ever happened to me." I broke open my cookie and read the fortune. "Home is where you find peace." Looking around at Aunt Maggie's modest living room with its mismatched furniture and my soccer trophies on the shelf, I knew I had found mine. I smiled at Aunt Maggie across the table. It had been almost 2 years since she'd become my guardian. 2 years since the judge had finally ended the ugliest custody battle our small county courthouse had ever seen. Before Aunt Maggie stepped in, my life was a constant tug-of-war between Mom and Dad. They'd split when I was 12, and things got nasty fast. Dad claimed Mom was unstable and neglectful. Mom said Dad was controlling and manipulative. I was stuck in the middle, shuttled between their homes every week like unwanted baggage. My belongings perpetually packed in a duffel bag that never fully emptied at either house. Dad would grill me about Mom's new boyfriend. "Is he staying overnight? Does he drink? What time does your mother get home?" He'd record our conversations without telling me, hoping to catch something he could use in court. Sometimes I'd notice his phone casually placed on the coffee table, screen dark but voice memo running, and my words would dry up in my throat. Mom wasn't better. She'd forget to take me to soccer practice on days when Dad was supposed to watch me play. She'd schedule doctor appointments during my weekends with him, then tell the judge he wasn't meeting my medical needs. Once, she even enrolled me in an art class that met every Saturday morning, right when Dad was supposed to pick me up, without telling either of us until the instructor called wondering where I was. The worst part was how they used money against each other. Dad suddenly stopped paying child support, claiming Mom was spending it on herself. Mom responded by maxing out their old joint credit card on expensive clothes for me that I didn't need or want. I remember standing awkwardly in a high-end department store as she piled designer jeans into my arms, whispering, "Your father can afford it," with a bitter smile that made my skin crawl. My grades dropped from straight A's to C's and D's. I couldn't sleep, lying awake listening for angry phone calls or surprise visits. I started having stomach aches so bad the school nurse called home twice in 1 week. The pain was real, but what the adults didn't understand was that it hurt worse when the nurse had to decide which parent to call first. That's when Aunt Maggie showed up. Dad's sister had always lived a few hours away, visiting only on holidays, but she came to town for a court hearing and saw how bad things had gotten. I remember her face as she watched me shuffle between my parents in the courthouse hallway, neither of them actually looking at me, both too busy glaring at each other. After court that day, she took me for ice cream at the old-fashioned parlor downtown. She didn't ask about my parents or the case. Instead, she asked about my friends, my favorite subjects, what books I was reading. For the first time in months, someone was interested in me, not in using me against someone else. I ate a banana split and talked until the ice cream melted into sweet puddles. The next week, Aunt Maggie filed for temporary guardianship. The judge, tired of my parents' endless accusations, granted it for 3 months while the court investigated further. I still remember the shock on my parents' faces. They'd been so focused on fighting each other that they never imagined a third option. I moved into Aunt Maggie's spare bedroom. She had a small house with a yard where I could kick my soccer ball against the fence for hours, working out my frustrations with each thud of the ball. She worked from home as a graphic designer, so she was always around but never hovering. She made simple meals, helped with homework, and never ever asked me to carry messages to either parent. Her house smelled like coffee and laundry detergent, not like the tension that had permeated both my parents' homes. Mom and Dad were furious. They finally agreed on something, that Aunt Maggie had no right to interfere. Dad called her a traitor. Mom said she was jealous and wanted to steal me away. They both hired expensive lawyers to fight her. The irony wasn't lost on me that they could suddenly cooperate when faced with a common enemy. The investigation revealed more than anyone expected. Dad's drinking problem came to light when he showed up intoxicated to a supervised visit, his words slurring as he tried to convince the social worker he was just tired. Mom's boyfriend turned out to have a record for drug possession that she'd hidden from the court. Both their homes were found to be unstable environments. Dad's apartment filled with empty bottles, Mom's house with strange people coming and going at all hours. Meanwhile, the court-appointed psychologist reported that I was thriving with Aunt Maggie. My grades improved from C's back to B's, then A's. The stomachache stopped. I joined a local soccer team and made new friends who knew nothing about my family drama. I started sleeping through the night again, the nightmares becoming less frequent. The final hearing lasted 2 days. Mom cried and promised to do better. Dad brought character witnesses who said what a great father he'd been before the divorce. Their lawyers argued that blood parents should always have priority. The courtroom was tense, the air conditioning struggling against the heat of so many conflicting emotions. Aunt Maggie simply showed my report cards, soccer trophies, and medical records from before and after I came to live with her. She didn't attack my parents. She just showed the facts. Her voice stayed calm while everyone else seemed to be shouting. She brought photos of me studying at her kitchen table, playing in the backyard, smiling for the first time in months. The judge extended her temporary guardianship for another 6 months, ordering both parents to complete parenting classes and therapy, before reconsidering custody. He looked directly at me before announcing his decision. The first adult in the legal system who seemed to see me as a person rather than a problem to solve. Neither of them completed the requirements. Dad moved to Arizona for a job opportunity a month later, packing his apartment and leaving only a hasty goodbye and promises to call often. Mom started dating someone new and missed several scheduled visits, always with elaborate excuses about car trouble or work emergencies. They both called occasionally, sent birthday cards sometimes, but their interest in the custody battle seemed to fade once they couldn't use me to hurt each other anymore. When the 6 months ended, the judge made Aunt Maggie my permanent legal guardian. Mom didn't even show up for the hearing. Dad called in from Arizona, saying he supported his sister taking care of me until he was more established in his new life. The courtroom was nearly empty that day, a stark contrast to the packed emotional hearings from before. That was 18 months ago. Since then, we'd settled into a routine that felt normal, even comfortable. Aunt Maggie came to every soccer game, cheering loudly from the sidelines in her mismatched team colors. She helped me study for tests, making flashcards late into the night. She taught me to cook simple meals and let me decorate my room how I wanted. When I had nightmares about the fighting, she'd sit with me until I fell back asleep, never making me feel weak for being scared. Dad called on holidays. Mom sent occasional texts. I visited Dad in Arizona last summer for 2 awkward weeks of tourist attractions and forced conversations. Mom had moved to a neighboring town with her new boyfriend and saw me for lunch every few months, always at the same chain restaurant where she'd spend most of the time on her phone. They were like distant relatives now, people I knew but didn't rely on. "What does your fortune say?" I asked Aunt Maggie, pushing away memories of the custody battle. We were finishing our weekly Chinese takeout, a Friday tradition we'd established early in my stay. She cracked open her cookie and read it with a smile. "A happy family is made, not born." We both laughed at how perfect it was. The next morning, I found a letter in the mail from Dad. He was getting married again and wanted me to be in the wedding. Aunt Maggie saw my face as I read it. "You don't have to decide right away," she said. "And whatever you choose is okay." That afternoon, Mom texted that she was pregnant and would be busy with a new baby, but hoped we could still have our monthly lunches. I showed Aunt Maggie both messages. She didn't criticize either of my parents. She just listened as I sorted through my complicated feelings. "They're moving on with their lives," I said finally. "Yes," Aunt Maggie agreed. "And that's okay. People change and grow. The important thing is that you know where home is." I thought about that as I did my homework that evening. Mom and Dad had both chosen new paths that didn't center around me. Maybe that was healthier than fighting over me like I was a prize to be won. Maybe it was even a kind of love, recognizing that Aunt Maggie could give me something they couldn't. The next day at school, my English teacher assigned an essay about family. The other kids groaned, but I started writing immediately. I wrote about how family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you find when everything falls apart. I wrote about soccer games and Chinese takeout, about mismatched furniture and late-night talks. I wrote about a woman who never planned to have kids, but became the parent I needed. When I got home, Aunt Maggie was in the kitchen making spaghetti, my favorite meal on ordinary weeknights, not because something terrible had happened, or because she was trying to win my loyalty against someone else, just because this was our life now. I put my backpack down and joined her at the counter to help with the garlic bread. We worked side by side without talking much. We didn't need to. The custody battle was over. The courts were done with us. My parents had moved on to new chapters. And here in this kitchen, with this unexpected family we'd built, I had found something worth more than winning any fight. I had found peace.